Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Waldvogel. I'm the membership coordinator with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. Welcome to the Colorado Grain Chains Homeschool webinar series number 14. Before we get started into our presenter, just want to let you know, feel free to ask questions through the Q&A function. That's going to be the easiest way to get your question out there. Anything that we don't get answered during the hour, we'll try our best to get answered afterwards. Also, we will be recording today, so this will be available via a YouTube link through the Colorado Grain Chain website at coloradograinchain.com for folks. And then for Grain Chain members, you can also access recipes, other notes, other goodies, and resources from each of our webinar series and other workings of Colorado Grain Chain. So I think that's all the hummum that I need to cover here, but I will get directly to our speaker and to the good stuff. Let me introduce to you Amy Halloran. She's the author of The New Bread Basket, How the New Crop Grain Growers, Plant Breeders, Millers, Maltsters, Bakers, Brewers, and local food activists are redefining our daily loaf. Amy is also known as the Flour Ambassador. She's a journalist and activist who is energizing the diverse range of interests and talents that are building our local and regional grain economies, making them more inclusive for all citizens. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to hear what you have to share with us, Amy, and I'll hand it directly over to you. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you, everybody at the Colorado Grain Chain, for wanting to have me. I do love to talk about flour and talk about the grain communities that are coming together over new ways to grow, sell, and use grains. It's a topic that I discovered 10 years ago, this very month, in this very room behind me. My husband brought me a cookie that had extraordinary oats and wheat, and I could tell that it had really good butter and chocolate, but you know that baked goods are supposed to have really good butter and chocolate, and the grains took me by surprise. And I still remember exactly where I was standing, and I still remember the surprise of that, but I never could have predicted how much it would fill my life. That little cookie really stretched out so that I could explore all the amazing people doing something new with grains. And it's really fun to see how many people are coming along, also getting excited about this. We have the horrible fortune of the pandemic allowing us to have new awareness of the possibilities of shorter supply chains. All the small flour mills did really well in the pandemic. They were able to adjust to the disruptions that the many lockdowns caused around the country, and so it's a bittersweet success there. But I want to do a little slideshow today to talk about. There I am. Am I sharing my screen yet? No, I bet not.
Not yet.
Okay, let me go backwards. So here we are.
Perfect. There you go.
And there we go. So I put together a few slides so that I can have some guidance to this train of thought that I'm gonna have. I want to take you through a little bit of what I know and see what people are up to. So there you go. That's the cover of my book, and I've hidden the very long subtitle. The people are what I love the most about this book. As soon as I started meeting the people who were behind that pivotal cookie that I had, I joked about wanting to start writing a book. And it was a joke, but not a joke. And it was a joke that allowed me to really explore what people were doing. And I wrote articles along the way. And for farming newspapers and edible communities. And then I pitched a book. By the time I pitched my book proposal, New York wasn't quite ready, the New York publishing scene, that is. Two of the agents that I spoke to about my book said, there is no narrative thread. They couldn't understand. I mean, the narrative thread was quite clear. The book that I proposed is exactly what I wrote. People are growing and using grains outside of the dominant commodity system. But this New York publishing thing, what they meant was, nobody's written about this yet, so we don't know how to market it. I took it pretty personally, of course, to get rejected, but luckily I found a home with Chelsea Green, who is a mission-driven publisher. They knew exactly what it meant. I made pancakes at the Needham conference to my editor, Ben Watson. I knew that he was there as they sent out editors to look for storytellers. And I wanted to make sure that this editor knew that I was writing a book. And so I gave him extra pancakes and even some pancake mix to take home. And then I sent him my proposal within a few days and it went forward. So publishing as in mills and bakeries, they all benefit from something much more direct channel rather than mainstream. They knew that there was a market and an audience for the stories of grains. And they were really, they're very aware of this storytelling capacity for creating change. And that's what I love about this funny little flower career that I've grown into, is that by being a voice for the different grain communities that are happening, I can inspire more to happen. And I put together some images of a few groups, such as the Colorado Grain Chain. I work with the Artisan Grain Collaborative in the Upper Midwest, and I'm very excited to be connected to this networked effort to try to bring together all the people from field to beer and baked good and spirits. In many ways, Asheville Bread Festival, some of you may know, it's a great event that brings together people, much like the Maine Grain Alliance. These two places, these two bread fairs, have turned into that springboarding that happens from people meeting each other and sharing ideas of what they're doing and carrying new possibilities forward. I think that how each of these grain groups began is really forecasting of they're all unique, is what I want to say. So the Maine Grain Alliance began from community members in Maine who wanted to have their area, an area very similar to mine in upstate New York, that is to say, an economy that's still scrambling to figure itself out as the industry left over the course of the 20th century. So all of these places have been vacuumed out of opportunity, and so bread has found a home in some places. For instance, in Skowhegan, Maine, the Needham Conference grew into a mill, and that mill is situated in a former jail. So something that was, literally holding the potential of people is now holding the potential of other grain possibilities and allowing growers to sell directly for things like oats. Much of the oats in Maine that are grown up in Aroostook County, which is called the Iowa of Maine, are sold across the border into Canada. Why? Because there's very few to no opportunities to process the oats. Having an oat function, an oat processing function in Skowhegan allows growers to say, hey, I want to do this differently, sell direct to a mill rather than to a conglomerate, and be able to get more price, be able to make more choices about which seeds I'm going to plant, and also be able to have more say, more agency in the choices of the growing practices. So this is why I'm so interested in what these mills and what these community organizations represent, because we don't have, for farmers, enough opportunities for them to really break out of the dominant system. It's still very hard after 10 years of eating great cookies and thinking about grain stuff for me to comprehend the way that farmers are locked in to so many choices. And all of these groups really represent examples of people who are speaking for growers and speaking for new possibilities. A few sentences ago, I was paralleling Maine Grain Alliance and the Asheville Bread Festival. And the reason I talk about both of them is that in the same sentence is Maine Grain Alliance was really started by community members. And the Asheville Bread Festival was very specifically started by bakers. One baker wanted bakers to know each other. There was, growing craft bread or artisan bread, wood-fired, natural leavening, sometimes whole grain flour. And he felt that they needed to know each other. And so he got everybody together for a bread festival in Asheville. The bakers are all over the state of North Carolina. And then when 2008 rolled around and there was a global grain shortage and bakers lost, especially bakers who were using organic flour, they suddenly lost the ability to get flour. So those relationships in Asheville or throughout North Carolina served them, and they started to investigate how can we get local wheat so that we can have some food security. Food security has a lot of different meanings, but for a baker, I think having a steady supply within these many interruptions that happen, such as a global commodity disaster or a global pandemic, being able to have a shorter supply chain will help you keep running your business all the way through. Common Grain Alliance is down in Virginia. Cascadia Grains Conference has been doing incredible stuff in the Pacific Northwest. I've been to their conference a number of times and I really love it. The Northeast Grain Shed is a group that I'm involved in up here, and really love the energy trying to bring people together in new choices. The Bread Lab, people are probably familiar with in Washington State, and the Bread Lab has spawned a lot of other elements around the world, really. The UK Grain Lab that Kimberly Bell started was born in her head at a grain gathering at the Bread Lab, and she has done a marvelous job of gathering people in the UK around the ideas of non-extractive economies. What does it take to really support everyone from soil to food and beer? How can we do this? Grains is down in, it's down under, and then way up here at the top, I put Grow NYC, and well, there's the California Grain Chain, which modeled itself after Grow NYC. Grow NYC really is the grandmother of regional grain projects, and I admire what they're doing so much. Grow NYC is an organization in New York City that runs more than 50 farmers markets, among other projects, urban greening projects. And more than a decade ago, I'd say about 15 years ago, they started looking into getting their bakers who sold at farmers markets to get aligned with the mission to serve the agriculture of the region. Bakers were using ConAgra flour and bananas, and yet they were able to sell in a producer-only marketplace. How's that fair? How can you make the bakers support the regional agriculture? And so they couldn't just say, hey, you must use regional flour. They went out and they investigated what regional flour exists, where are the mills, where are the farmers who are willing to grow food grade grain in the Northeast. And they really put their boots on the ground, specifically June Russell's boots right on the ground as she was doing farm inspections. And she got a grasp of what existed and what was possible and what to support. And June and Grow NYC really collaborated throughout the Northeast with places like the Northeast Organic Farming Association, the New York chapter specifically, Cornell, UVM, to try to figure out a private agricultural researcher named Elizabeth Dick was really involved, University of Pennsylvania. There's so many people who are involved in this, and I just realized I didn't get the logo of another one that I just want to mention, which is Craft at Chatham University in Pennsylvania, and they're doing an awful lot. But really, at the beginning, it was Grow NYC, and they are suggesting through their actions ways that the rest of us who are really eager to support non-commodity grain systems can make things happen. And what they are is what I've just been talking about are community grain projects versus commodity grain systems. In a standard system, I think the best way I can tell this story is to think about the ways that these alternative grain systems have really sprung up from nowhere rather than from places that have existing grain infrastructure. Within the grain belt, it's quite a bit harder to change gears and create new pathways, because what is happening is going to keep happening. There's so many barriers to farmers creating change. It can't just be a consumer voting with their fork. It has to be, say, a consumer network trying to vote for the infrastructure with actual grants to get a grain hub, small scale elevators, or the testing that people need so that your food grade grains are of food grade quality. I was invited by the two really great guys out on the Palouse, Dick and Don Shireman. They run a little farm, 30-acre farm in the midst of gigantic wheat, tiny wheat and big wheat. And they wanted me to come talk about the direct marketing opportunities for growers to their growers. So they invited me out to make pancake breakfast at a little country store, and it was amazing, because I realized after I gave my spiel to them about these things that I love, I listened for an hour to their difficulties in doing anything different, be it organics or direct marketing. And that's when I began to see that this stuff is easier to get a footing in places that don't have an existing grain system in place. I want to talk a little bit about the history of how we got these concentrated grain areas. As I was writing my book, I fell in love with the way that people wrote about agriculture in the 19th century. And Asa Fitch was the first paid entomologist in the United States. And he was hired because New York ran Canada ran an essay contest. The wheat midge was a really big problem that was because of the tendency to cash crop over cash crop. It invited more pests, and it wasn't just the Hessian fly, but it was also the wheat midge. So Asa Fitch wrote some beautiful descriptions in the report on the noxious, beneficial, and other insects of New York State that he gave to the legislature. He was hired by the state legislature to talk about interventions from the wheat midge and other insects so that you could really keep agriculture going. And what he says here, every farmer then made it a matter of pride to raise at least all he required for bread for his own family, and every district sent a considerable surplus each year to market. So right there is that bridge between subsistence and commercial farming. And we slid out of that into the cash market opportunities for wheat pretty early on because of a number of things. I don't think I am versed enough to really describe it tightly, so I'll just keep on this historical bunny hole here of so one of the advances of transportation and technology that helped create these concentrations of grain farming was the Erie Canal. So the Erie Canal, I love the Erie Canal because I live right near it, and also because there was a flour merchant involved in the marketing of the idea. A flour merchant named Jesse Howley he went to debtor's prison in 1807 and in Canandaigua, New York, because a lot of people went to debtor's prison at that time. It was a mechanism for dealing with the many failings of early capitalism. So that was not unusual, but he spent 18 months in living above a jail. He must have had some privileges to walk around the town, and I'm sure he had access to some maps because he wrote a series of letters that were published in the Genesee Messenger, describing the necessity of a canal across New York State to connect with the Great Lakes and really develop the raw materials of the natural resources of New York. He wrote about how canals in England and France had developed the surrounding agriculture and economy. He never ever mentioned flour, even though he was a flour merchant. He signed his letters anonymously. He signed them Hercules. But Governor Clinton, or before he was governor, DeWitt Clinton, took these letters, Hercules letters, and used them in his fighting for the Erie Canal because nobody wanted to pay for it. It was huge. It was huge. This was the canal that invented engineering in the United States. There were not engineers, but from 1817 to 1825, the Erie Canal was built in pieces, and by 1825, the price of shipping wheat from Western New York to New York City went from $100 a ton to $10 a ton. And all of a sudden, you really have the chance to truly exploit the land and have possibility market-wise. It also carved a path for opening up new lands that were even flatter and even better for more agricultural advances that led to the that led to the grain belt as we know them. This is not to say that New York quit entirely. You know, if you look at this chart, 1886, we still had quite a lot of wheat, and I was talking about 1825. And if you remember our wheat midge, that's 1855, 1856, that was interrupting the harvest. So we were still growing a lot of wheat in New York, even as these changes were happening in transportation, agricultural technology, milling technology. 1880 is when we really started having some roller milling in the United States, and roller milling is what made the milling industry take off, because you could do everything much, much more quickly. And bear in mind that 1880, it wasn't strictly roller milling, it was also stone milling. At the beginning of taking in roller mills, it wasn't all one or the other. They were integrated systems that happened. This slide has dates of the places that show how transportation and technology, and then, you know, land policies and access really smushed around where milling was very popular. 1650, that points to the Dutch. 1840 with Rochester, that Rochester became the Flour City, F-L-O-U-R, Flour City. It was, and it later became the F-L-O-W-E-R city, because it needed to do something else pretty quickly, because by 1860, St. Louis and Milwaukee were milling centers. I read an interesting book lately that taught me more about the development of Richmond. This is directly tied in with slavery, because as we got more acquainted with, we being white settlers in America, got more acquainted with the commodities of sugar and coffee and cotton, and began trading them all around, Richmond, Virginia really wanted to develop something to swap for coffee. And by 1850, Virginia flour and Virginia wheat were really known for being phenomenally profitable, and they couldn't have been profitable without the skilled labor of so many enslaved people. So that's something that's I'm learning more about and want to know more about. So when we get to discussion part, we'll, if anybody knows more, let's talk. Another place that I learn a lot about these different flour moments is by looking at the trade journal for the United States. I believe there were two, but the American Miller is the one that I found a digitized access to the entire year of 1915. And both of these, this ad right here for Know Your Flour, what's that sound like? Know your farmer, know your flour. And so back in 1915, they're really trying to, this suggests the migration to centralized processing, because farmers are trying to create an identity preserved object to save their farming and milling industries. So that's pretty interesting. If you get this kind of stuff is really easily accessible, all for free, and it's just endless things to look at as we try to think about where we can go. We're not going back to any perfect moment of the past, but we have, I think, looking at, as we really went to big concentrations, looking at the way that they expressed it is really useful. The way that people expressed the change within the industry and responded to it. There's fun stuff about white flour and do-gooders trying to get people to eat whole grains, you know, just lots and lots of fun stuff to read. Resulting in the fact that our daily bread and beer are now made far from home. You know, I chose 1915 as a mile marker because in my own city, Freihofer's began in 1913. And this bakery is a legend for how things grew. So the Freihofer started in Pittsburgh, the Freihofer's Bakery. And one of the, Charles Freihofer was traveling through Troy, New York, to look at a conveyor belt oven in Montreal. And on a layover, he saw all the women who were working in the collar industry. And he said, I could get my sons situated here with bakeries because there's such industry. So in 1913, the Freihofer's Factory Bakery started. And, you know, that's a representation of factory baking on the rise. 1920 is the mile marker for when more bread was made out of home than in the home in America. We don't have a tradition of the village baker, so there was a lot of home baking until just 100 years ago. But the way Freihofer's talks about itself in the newspaper, they gave away bread. And I did a little research. I haven't been able to find their recipes, but I have been able to find in that American Miller that a mill in town increased its milling capacity to have, they weren't necessarily using New York wheat, but they were selling to Freihofer's, is what I'm assuming. Why else would you in 1915 expand your milling capacity in upstate New York, except that there was a bakery in Troy, Schenectady, and Albany, a factory bakery in each city with tons of bread going through on a conveyor belt going through. So it's just an incredible way to map. And, you know, talk about labor issues. A rumor has reached us to the effect that we are not a friend of the working man. And it's an, you know, they're saying that we, I think there's something about home ownership. It's really wonderful to see this assertion, whether it has any truth to it or not, because it just shows how we've always had a concern about making enough money and making enough, you know, in the way, and knowing that there would be a factory could interrupt someone's possible way of making a living. That was a big concern. They ran this ad in all the papers around us. So where are we going? Here are some of the mills in the Northeast that are happening. And I had put together a list. And then I want to talk a little bit about some success stories. Referring back to Grow NYC and its success, I think I explained how their model works. They began, no, I didn't explain the actual mechanics. They began asking their bakers in 2010 to use 15% local flour. And they raised that, I think, last year to 25%. And that's worked remarkably well. They do other marketing events like Rye Week, and that was a great way to just introduce concepts of rye and get it over. And they never stop there selling the idea of grains. They have a stand right now that moves great quantities of grains for growers who are not able to do to trek into New York City. The grain shed really spreads from Maine to Pennsylvania. And they decided that, you know, in this instance, we need to serve the market and create a marketplace for grains. So that's a tremendous success story. And another one I want to point to is one that happened this year with the AGC, the Artisan Grain Collaborative. The Neighbor Loaves project, the logo was made by the Northeast Grain Shed, but who is also participating in this. Neighbor Loaves is the brainchild of Alyssa Hartman, the director of AGC. She thought, how can I secure businesses and secure markets for farmers who are about to plant? And so these Neighbor Loaves are ways for people to buy a loaf at full price from a regular online purchasing thing, and it's going to have at least 50% local flour. But these loaves are bought for the emergency feeding system, so all the way through the supply chain is supported. And I think it's been a terrific success. I'm not sure what the numbers are now. I'm sure they're up to 15,000, I'm pretty sure. 15,000 Neighbor Loaves throughout the upper Midwest have been sold. And that is securing the entire supply chain. And I just wish we could come up with solutions that are similar to that. And of course, the ability to get fresh flour to consumers was a tremendous success, and I want to build on that without such dire economic circumstances at work, economic, health, and social circumstances too. So those are some of the things I think about. Oh, and these are, I think, part of our job as lovers of bread and flour is to keep talking about this stuff and showing the work, showing all the people who are in grain, and showing the advantage of what is the advantages from field to loaf, from field to beer, from field to bottle, for everyone in this system. So I think I've said enough, and I'm ready to take some questions. I hope there are some.
Great. Well, yeah, as some of these questions roll in, I just really want to thank you again for that presentation. It was neat to get a good dose of the history there too, but also exciting to hear about all of the regional grain projects happening in the Northeast and other parts of the country, and certainly inspirational. I think, sometimes I know from my perception, just not really coming from a grain world, I come from a ranching background. I look at the things that Colorado Grain Chain is doing, and it's seems so, the completely pioneering efforts, and it's neat to see that there's some of this other work happening across the country. So that's really neat to see. Andrew, do you have any questions off the bat? I wanted to also introduce Andrew Calabrese. He's joining us and is familiar with Amy, and just wanted to also provide him an opportunity to chime in and ask any questions at any time.
Yeah, I was wondering, Amy, if you could say more about the Neighbor Loaf is one thing, and the philosophy behind it, and if you could give us a sense of whether that's taking off elsewhere. I've heard of the approachable loaf too, and I'm wondering if how those are similar or different.
Right. So the Approachable Loaf is the project of the Bread Lab Collective, and their method, I'm not involved with the Bread Lab Collective, so I hope I'm not misrepresenting it, but they are about making a whole grain or partial whole grain loaf that is really acceptable. There's an idea that artisan loaves are not, they're not as family friendly, not as sandwich friendly. So the Approachable Loaf is a take on that. The Neighbor Loaves is somewhat connected just because it's about bread, but it's really an idea that is about the supply chain, you know. So let's take it, for example, with one bakery. One of the first 3 bakeries in the Midwest was Hewn in Evanston, Illinois. So they buy from a variety of mills in the upper Midwest, and they made their loaf that was going to go to a specific food pantry using, actually, I don't know their percentage of flour, but I think it was 100% local flour, because I'm pretty sure they use all local flour in their breads. And the idea was they put that on their website, and it's for $6.50, so it's the price of a full price loaf. Then the bakery will accumulate those orders until they get to whatever a batch is. They'll bake a batch, and then Alyssa Hartman from the AGC made the connection with a pantry, so that bakeries already trying to struggle, you know, just to keep it all together during the pandemic, wouldn't have one more thing to make. So it was a pretty easy connection right there. The Hillside Pantry was very close to Hewn Bread. And the Hillside Pantry comes over. They take the bread when they have it baked. It's sliced. It's like I said, it's at least 50% local grain, but it's more than that in that instance. And for that bakery, it was super helpful because they were running 2 rents. They were renovating a bakery at the same time and trying to keep everything going. So to have, you know, an extra income stream was really useful. I wish I knew how many. Maybe Alyssa will put it. Alyssa, maybe you are here, I don't even know. Or my colleague Elena knows how many bakeries in the upper Midwest are participating. Quite a few. We have a lot here in the Northeast that the Northeast Grain Shed has coordinated. There are a lot of, and there are things that are not called neighbor loaves that are happening all over the place too. Because baking is a naturally generous thing. You take this, you know, small amount of flour and it can grow pretty quickly. So, you know, as the idea for neighbor loaves was coming together, a milling baker near me, Antoine Gerlain of Sparrowbush Bakery, he was headed up to Vermont to get a bread slicer so that he could give sliced bread to people. And so he said, can I use the name Neighbor Loaves? I said, yeah, of course. You know, we'd like people to use local flour. He's entirely a local flour. You know, because the idea is we want to support the mills. We want to support all the enterprises and feed people who were experiencing a shortage of bread as the regular supply chain was crinkling. I used to work in emergency feeding. I ran a soup kitchen and a food pantry, and sliced bread is a hot commodity all the time because factory bakeries have gotten a much tighter handle on their waste. And, you know, I remember being at some emergency feeding event probably 2 years ago, and we were talking about how can we get fresh baked bread into the food pantries because there's a shortage in normal times. There's just not enough bread. So I see great potential for this expanding.
Great, yeah. And speaking of other regional projects, Bruce was highlighting and just wanted to know if you were familiar with Barrio Brad down in
oh my gosh,
South and
he's
Central
amazing,
and all the work going on between them.
Yeah. Yeah, Don Guerrero, I hope I'm saying his name right, is an incredible baker and a very, very early community supported baker. He yeah, when I come to Colorado, I want to get there too, because he's really got it all right. And I love the work he's doing. And he's a very active baking instructor as well. Yeah.
Oh, and Eric had a question. If you were familiar with kind of any cooperative structures or sharing structures where grain harvesting, cleaning, storage, milling equipment is shared among farmers in a community. What are some of the benefits around reducing equipment costs and labor, but then also what are some of the challenges with such collaboration?
Yeah, that is such a tough thing to achieve because especially in areas where your harvest windows are pretty tight, shared harvesting is super tough. Shared harvesting equipment. That's not to say that some people don't do it, but there's been stabs at creating sort of equipment libraries and mobile cleaning units that I can see seed cleaners going around. I think that would be really good. Honore, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I speak the worst, but Honore, Farm and Mill. Are you familiar with them? They have a mobile mill, and I don't know if they have cleaning equipment on it, but they're in California and they're specifically producing ancient grains for communion. I mean, it's a community grain project too. They rightfully belonged on the community page, but they have some mobile. So I think there's great potential, but it's super tricky to make it work. I think if we can look back to the past and see there were mobile seed cleaners till not long ago. It's really been the consolidation of seed companies over the last maybe 50 years, maybe shorter, that community cleaning capacity has gone down, and I see an awful lot of possibility for that. Yeah.
No, thanks. Yeah, and I think we've experienced some of that same challenge through our co-op development center with tool libraries and shared equipment, and a lot of times it is that specialized equipment that can fit best with some of that sharing opportunities. Richard had a question. If you've read, speaking of history, if you've read The Wheat Plant, Its Origin, Culture, Growth, Development, Composition, Varieties, Diseases, etc. It looked like it was written by John H. Clippart around 1860. So it's a really valuable history of early varieties of wheat in the USA.
I haven't, but my friend Richard Shireman, I'm sure has, and he's shown me. So Richard Shireman has done so much research on the history, and I think he has given me prints from there, or at least information. What a great resource. Maybe you could pop that. Is that in the chat and I didn't see it?
That was a question, but we can definitely share it with you.
Yeah, let's get that over in the chat.
Okay, I'll copy it right now into the chat. And then I think Andrew had another question.
Yeah, Amy, your book is really inspiring because it lays out a whole landscape for what's happening now, and we look at the Colorado grain chain. We look at what's happening in other parts of the country and borrow ideas where we can. And I was thinking about how all of this is happening right now, but with the pandemic, suddenly everybody became so much more interested in baking and became much more conscious of flour and the source of it and all these. I was wondering if you could make any comments about this sort of boom in home baking that happened with the pandemic.
It's crazy, isn't it? It really took everybody by surprise. When you look at things like the King Arthur catalog, somebody gave me a catalog from 1984 or something, and it had so much more flour than mixes. If you look at a modern that's what people prefer. They don't think they have, or pre-pandemic, people didn't think they had baking knowledge or time. You know, you would hear this even at conferences from people who are doing direct milling and selling at farmers markets. The advice was always get a mix out there so that you know, have a mix or two on the table for the people who don't think they have time to bake. And so to have this reacquaintance, this new curiosity, I mean, part of it was practical, right? They couldn't, the bread shelves were empty at stores, and they had time again. It is a wonderfully comforting thing to bake your own bread, and to bake anything. You know, there's so few things in life that have a beginning, middle, and end I mean, okay, so it might be a long time if you're doing sourdough, but, you know, a concrete thing. That's part of why I love pancakes. You know, you mix them and then you eat them and they're right there, and it's, you know, it's beautiful and it's fast and it's something you've made. You know, I think that that need for tangible handwork, even before the pandemic stuck many of us at home, people who are not in the service industry, you know, or non-essential workers, I think that we've been craving a more tactile life.
Yeah. Could I ask one more question?
Yeah.
You lately, since the murder of George Floyd, you've been a really outspoken proponent of racial justice, and that has been great to hear your voice on that, because you reach a group of people that I think benefit from hearing it. We all are, most of the people involved in the grain movement are white, and you know, that's not a criticism of myself or anyone else, but it's great that you're doing so much to raise consciousness. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about the intersection between the racial justice movement and grain and bread, in your own, what you're witnessing.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of ways that we can pair our interests in new approaches to grains with new approaches to our shared humanity, and beginning to look at what's been overlooked. You know, I couldn't help. I think the things that began to add up for me was noticing Ahmaud Arbery's death and thinking about his mother. And then I'm Amy. You know, is there Amy Cooper in me? You know, and then George Floyd, and knowing that, you know, that accumulation was just too much. And being the mom of two white boys who have incredible privilege and access to everything. My wild white boy can run where. So I think that and that boy, lucky preset I had was in February, before things shut down, he invited me to the community college where Lavada Nahan, the African-American interpreter, newly hired African-American interpreter for Parks and Recreation in New York State, she was giving a talk, and the talk was titled, "Get the South Out of New York's Story of Slavery." You know, we have our own relationship to slavery, and we really need to own up to it. So she got me reading about the Dutch history. Bakers Against Racism is a great way to fundraise for Black-led organizations to create some of the solutions. I think that are there's a lot of ways that we can jump in. You know, for me, I keep on looking at the history and trying to, I should put the name, The Reinvention of the Atlantic Slave Trade is an incredible book that I really recommend to just look at the ways that cotton, sugar, and coffee, not cotton, wheat, sugar, and coffee work together, and to get to know the stories of the truths that were happening. And, you know, so I think that if you're more comfortable looking at history, you can look at history, Bakers Against Racism, and any other fundraising effort. I mean, take a look at the Black-led groups around you, because who can you support to help people find their own solutions? And, you know, Kimberly Bell is doing that. I'm not going to equate another crisis that is happening is what happened in Beirut. And I know we're at time. So, you know, there's a fundraising effort for that too. There's so many ways that we can capture our love of grain and work so Kimberly Bell raising money for Mavia Bakery in Beirut, that's another way. But there are so many ways that we can seize this moment. Farming While Black and the Northeast Farmers of Color Network, there are ways to direct money to Black farms and help people help themselves to address the many situations that are overlapping here.
Thanks so much. You may know the Colorado Grain Chain did a bake sale for two Black-led organizations in Colorado recently. One is called Frontline Farming, and they're based in Denver. And the other organization is 5280, which is the number of feet in a mile for Denver, the mile high city. 5280 Black Lives Matter. We also raised funds for them through the Colorado Grain Chain's bake sale in cooperation with several bakers around the state.
That's
So,
great.
yeah.
That's great. And do you have another bake sale coming up?
We do. Kim can respond to that.
Yeah. Well, I can too. It's so the next bake sale for racial justice is going to be happening September 19th. So yeah, as Andrew was saying, you know, it's raising funds for nonprofits that are doing social justice work in Colorado. And the best way to find out about that and get updates is just to sign up for email updates. You know, you can find that at coloradograinchain.com. But yeah, I completely agree, Amy. I think that there's not only ways to reduce supply chains and create markets for farmers, create jobs in rural and urban areas when it comes to those supply chains, but there's also ways to be creating better access to more nutrient-dense foods for people from all communities. So I think, you know, it's a multifaceted challenge, but it also has a lot of opportunities that go along with it.
Yeah, I think it puts value back in all the way. You know, I mean, our existing food system has minimal value all the way from field to table. But let's put the values back in: human values, social values, economic values, nutritional values. We can do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, with that, I know we are a bit over time, so I think we have to go for the day, but we're just so grateful for your time and all of your ideas. And I really enjoyed the especially the history part of it, but I think we're just getting to the big parts of the conversation around you know, racial justice and social change and improving our food system. So maybe even in the future we can have you back and we can really launch right into that too. That'd be lovely.
I would love that. I would love that. Thank you so much for letting me talk, and good luck, everyone.
Oh yeah.
Keep in touch, you know?
Absolutely. And for all of you online, yeah, we'll try to get any other questions answered and follow up. You can access this video through a link on coloradograinchain.com. You can also look at becoming a member, and we sure appreciate it. And we'll bid adieu for the day. But thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.